Welcome back, everybody. Today is the second of our roundtable discussions. This is a roundtable which we've sort of neutrally called practical aspects about research. But in fact, the idea is to ask questions that are not necessarily, they're questions that require you to have an opinion and to think not necessarily scientifically, but also ethically and morally, and use other ways of thinking about things. So Jerome and I had a couple of big fights while we were writing down the questions. So we're hoping that the discussion will be quite animated. So Jerome's going to start and I'll hand the microphone around the room.
Yeah, so do not be shy. If you have questions or comments, please do this whenever you want, okay? So, you know everybody, so I want to introduce you. And we thought that we would start with writing proposals. So observations, computer, funding proposals. Why not? Okay. And so we would like to have a bit of your experience on how you're doing this, what you would like to know when you were in your PhD thesis about writing proposals. Okay. So there is a list of questions that I will propose, and then I will pass the microphone. So how long to start in advance of the deadline? 1 hour or 1 month, 1 year? The science goals, is it better to ask very broad questions or very targeted questions? What is the feasibility? For observation and computers, how do you choose the instrument or the kind of observatory or the choice of supercomputer? And when you're writing proposal, do you do compromise? Who wants to start? Javier.
I consider myself an observational astronomer, so of course, this is only my view. So first question on how long to start in advance of the deadline. It's true that when you get some experience, last minute proposals sometimes work, because your brain is going so fast, you are so stressed, and I don't know why some of these proposals work, but at your stage of career, I will not go that direction, you have to plan it in advance. Especially now, I think the paradigm is changing, with ALMA, JWST, it's so hard to get a proposal through, So the pressure factor is now, I think, like 8, So sometimes you will feel it's like a lottery, in fact, but I think you should not be depressed. You have to keep going. I think, in my view, the paradigm has changed because 10 years ago for ALMA, the people that was going to evaluate your proposal was a panel of very experienced people, maybe professors, So 10 years ago, at that time, in the proposal, you were going to show how many papers you wrote on the subject, which is your collaborators, and so on. But now the paradigm has changed to the fact that to the point that proposals are anonymous, so the evaluator don't know your name, so this doesn't matter much. And in fact, you cannot even, for ALMA, for example, you cannot show your own papers. You cannot reveal yourself. So my point, a good proposal now these days. I'm sorry. The other paradigm of ALMA, for example, is that now a PhD student can evaluate your proposal. Okay, you know that for ALMA, you write a proposal. This means that you will have 10 proposals to evaluate. So if you're a PhD student and you submit a proposal to ALMA as a PI, this means that you will have to evaluate 10 proposals from other people. Okay, so it's not an entire committee evaluating all the proposals. We, the observers, are going to evaluate our own proposals. So this means that I think you have to adjust the level of your text to the evaluating person, which can be a young postdoc and so on. So for me, things like, for example, the global picture, of the problem. And because people will not be really experts, I think nowadays it works to try to condense your proposal in one important scientific question. And if you can draw a sketch, a painting of the, my observation will reveal this scenario or that one, something very easy to understand, At least for me, these kind of proposals, they work, Like binary science, this will test this and this. And Yeah, I think now these days you cannot be so technical compared to 10 years ago in a proposal, I think, because someone can be a young researcher evaluating you. And well, now I can pass the microphone because that was my view.
Thank you, Javier. So maybe for the first question, in how long to start in advance of the deadline? So who in this room has already written proposals? That might be. And so maybe we can make a statistics. Who did this 1 month in advance of the deadline? 6 months in advance of the deadline? It depends on which instrument. That's the point. As Javier was saying, it also depends on your expertise about the instrument. I mean, if you only have to draw and to write the rationale and you perfectly know the instrument, you already use it, or I mean, you can focus only on the scientific aspect of your rationale. The technical one, you will feel it easily. If you're totally new to an observatory, then you need to take this much in advance, and in general, to have a contact. It's always better with someone either experienced or a contact that is given to you as offered to you as in the proposal itself. So this question is quite dependent on which instrument. As Javier said, so for some now, most of the instruments or many of the instruments are international collaborations. And so there is a lot of pressure on them. So if you have a good idea, don't feel upset if it's not if you don't get it at the first time. If you're really convinced about an idea, push the idea. I mean, it's really an important aspect. It's not the lottery, because the lottery you have one chance over 13 million, so it's much less than 1/8, so or 1/10.
I think that's a very important point. Don't be, if you're not get it, try again, try again, try again. Okay. When when you have a pressure of 1/9, the rule is that you will be rejected. The rule is not that you will get it. Okay.
With respect to should you bring big questions, small questions? I would say my personal experience is that it depends also which proposal you are making and to which community you are addressing it. If it's European or US, also sometimes it's not necessarily the same kind of writings. It's just a question that it's not. It depends on the evaluation panels. And if you know that, then you can adapt it. If you do not know, it's always good to go on simple but clear and strong questions in any case. I don't know what was asked for the feasibility.
How do you know that it will be feasible or not?
This you have to either have a contact knowing how the instrument works, or to be experienced, unless it's really let's say a technically routine thing done by the instrument. You have to have a contact with people.
And when you don't, when the source has not been observed, for instance.
Yeah, this is a difficult question, because most observatories, well, most people are conservative by essence. So if you propose to do something new, totally new, that has never been observed, it's always very difficult, because you have to prove that it will give. We are in an era where the risk is sometimes not, to my opinion, not taken as at the level it should be in the observatories, because you need efficiency. But I would say that an observatory that doesn't lose 25% of the time, in the sense that it doesn't get something out, it's a problem, because in science you should test things that do not work at some point. They should work. I mean, it doesn't mean you should propose bullshit. It means that you should have a good idea, a real feasibility, but it's very difficult sometimes to convince the panels for something that is really out of the blue. And that's true that sometimes it's easier to make a proposal where you present something on a known source, known since 20 years, and you're just saying we will do the much better because the resolution has improved by a factor of 10. So for someone receiving this, it's easy, the feasibility is easy to estimate in that case. And that may be an issue for me at the moment for some observatories. There should be kind of several panels for, let's say, normal feasibility and a special panel for high risk observations to really evaluate that the feasibility is there, but the scientific question might be.
I agree with you with that today with the budget of observatories, there is a tendency of being conservative.
Only to say that, for example, for ALMA that I am more used to, you see that normally typical, at least galactic proposal is like 10 hours. So if you have a bright idea and you make numbers and it's like 25 hours, this proposal, I don't know why they are rejected. You know, it's what we said. We are more conservative now in the time we grant in observatories than 10 years ago. So now I changed my mind. I try to find a proposal with a smart or not idea that fits into what I consider it's like 10 hours observation, where I know it will be psychologically acceptable for the panel, you know, and this is not so good, you know.
Yeah, that's not so good, but that's.
But this is how I get my proposals.
But no, I think. Okay.
Yeah, no, I fully disagree with this. Not in principle. I think this is acting on experience, but as a prior, I think the prior should be exactly opposite to this. I mean, there are ways, depending on the observatory, there are ways that you can mitigate this. ALMA is not applying this, but for example, HST a long time ago has decided to weight the different size proposals in a way that doesn't disqualify the big ones. And so basically a panel is given a number of points, and a big proposal doesn't count as much as this not linear with the number of orbits, for example. And there are many ways that this can be allocated, and it also depends on the panel, I think. My two advice about proposals practically is one which is a bit extreme, and you may object, which is also, I think, HST driven since a long time, in a sense, which is, have you done everything before asking that proposal? That, you know, the question you want to address, maybe there are other ways, simpler ways. If you go for JWST or ALMA, that is like a lottery, there may be other ways to test it. And so maybe it's good to also take the cost benefit into account, you know, how much time you will invest. When you get the data, you will have also to invest, and maybe there are other ways. So if you have done everything and you check this, I think it also reflects in the proposal. This is the way that I can test this important question. And the second advice I will have is that for me, a proposal is like a small project. I mean, it's not applied to all proposals. Sometimes you just have an idea, you write the text yourself, you send it, and you're happy. But most of the time now, these days, it's like a project. And it means that you need to have a manager, you need to have a scientist, you need to have all these things, whatever is your project. And so make sure you have a team. It can be a team of 2, a team of 10, with clear assigned roles, and it's flexible, it can change with time, so that you don't necessarily depend on this person sending you the critical plot that will arrive an hour before when you're in panic mode. But it doesn't mean that you need to do this with a very strict planning 3 months in advance, but having a mindset about who is doing what, making sure those people know the assignment, know about the assignment. It makes a very positive, I think it's a positive adventure. I think writing a proposal is an adventure. It should be exciting, and it should be gratifying at the time you submit, even if you don't get the data at the end. It should be something like, oh yes, I achieved something. So that would be my advice, and organize yourself to make sure that your colleagues are with you, convinced about the exciting idea, and know what their role is within this little adventure.
Just want to add that when you prepare the proposal, being either observational or for HPC resources or even for funding, be sure about the focus of the project. There are guidelines, there are user guide, for instance, for the instruments. Sometimes you can find also that there are some contradictory indication. Don't be afraid to email the person. There are always person in charge of help you. And it may happen that indeed there are some errors. I mean, we are human. Also, people writing this user guide are human. So don't be afraid to contact people, to talk to people. Always, I think, colleagues and more experienced people that can give you some advice.
Yeah, I think a lot has been said, so you probably want to move on. But I would just wanted to maybe conclude by saying that it really depends on the telescope you're applying to. I think it's completely different how you would approach a proposal to a, not necessarily a small telescope, but a telescope that is not as international as ALMA to the one that, so I would be like Xavier, I am pragmatic when I apply to ALMA. I'm much less pragmatic and more idealistic if I apply for a time to Apex or something smaller that I feel I can put all my science and the high risk parts. Just the way this.
So most of you are PhD students, so I would advise this when you're doing your first proposal, start 6 months in advance, not to write the propositions, but to get ideas. Ideas take times to mature, okay? Good ideas. Ideas, you can have ideas every day, but good ideas takes time to mature. Discuss them with your team, with your people in your laboratory. Don't be afraid to do this, and get contact. If this is your first proposals, get contact with the instruments to get people that are experts of the instrument, of the observatory. Observatory all have astronomers, and they're relatively happy. I would say very happy, but to get contacted. Are there questions, comments on this one in the room? Don't be shy.
Yep, please.
Hi, so I was just wondering, since we're so junior and we don't have like a ton of connections, would you mainly build a group through your advisor, or how would you go about doing that? As you know, we're so early in our career, I feel like we don't have as many connections to build a team. So I guess what's your advice on that?
Perfect. Obviously, in normal. There's nothing wrong in exploiting the supervisor already has. Sure, why not? But I also would say, I would encourage to contact people directly. I don't see why not at all. Yeah.
So on the practical side, I think there are difficulties, and when you are you don't have so much experience and you have your supervisor, because it depends on the relation also you have, and there's a bit of politics around that you need to. So you don't need to have this in the center of your mind, because this will twist your ideas. But you need to be considerate that there may be, if you call out anybody outside of that circle, you may be calling the wrong person in the context of. So this should not be something that censure the fact that you want to do this, because maybe this is a person you work very well with. But you have to be considerate. It's going beyond just saying, oh yeah, I can connect with A, B, and C. It's building a team, even if it's a team of 2. So you need to apply all the criteria and ethics and everything. Communication is very important. If there is trust with your supervisor, I think you can talk openly. And I think he or she would encourage you to actually write proposals even without him or her involving and maybe just say, well, you know, if you're happy with it, I can support you by rereading the proposal, not necessarily being signing. But of course, the relation sometimes is not like this. It's a bit more complicated. There will maybe pressure from the supervisor to say, well, I want to be on the proposal, and you're not allowed to connect with this person. So just be aware of that, not put that in the center of your mind, because that's very negative thinking, but be aware of the fact that it goes beyond just a naive, you know, we're all happy and friends. This can happen. And so be considerate with this. But I would follow my gut feeling. If you have someone that you think is the right person for this particular great idea, then you should say, what can I do to get this? Communication, openness, and then, you know, find a way. I just add this, I don't want this to, you know, put it in the wrong flavor, but just to say it's a bit more complicated, especially when it comes to proposals.
So also another thing is that you should, you said teams, but try to get diverse teams. I mean, diversity in your team. Today, in particular in GISM, you need a lot of expertise to be able to interpret your data. So you should try to think in how we will interpret the data. Do you need simulations? Do you need laboratory astrophysics people? If you put them, they will be able to, on the teams, those guys will be able to tell you, this idea is good, but there will be such and such difficulties, and you can speak about it. Politics is important. Politics is important in the distribution of times, but not at your level. Okay? At your level, when you're writing proposal, you should not take care about politics. Okay? That's not your business. When your proposal will be rated, there is a bit of politics that is going on. You have to know this, but you can do nothing about it. Okay?
I was just wondering about the time that I would expect for my observation. So does that affect if my proposal would get accepted or not? Like if I am asking a long time, would that there is a chance that it will get rejected, or like what they favor for time wise?
Should not affect if the scientific idea is good, but then every observatory provides the statistics, you know, of the previous code. And you see normally there is always a peak on the accepted proposals around a given amount of observing time. So I think it's almost like 10, 12, you know.
Yeah, and then you are today in this domain, because some large programs may bring lots of science. In general, instruments are giving you the opportunity to ask a huge fraction of the times, but those are specific calls. Okay, for ALMA, there is this question of large program. Same at IRAM, there are large programs. GWST, I think that's the same. So if you're asking as a standard program the same amount of time that is usually given for a large program, you're making the wrong move. Okay.
So I have 3 more comments on this, maybe that could be useful. At least it's my view. One is don't ask for more time than you need. Doesn't make any sense. You know, if your sample is 200 objects, but you know you can answer with 50, ask for 50. Except if it's on a small observatory where you know you have luxury to do this, then take it. But if it's for the ones that we mentioned, but don't ask for less than you need. This is a big mistake that I've seen over and over. If you look at, I would say 70% of the early HST proposals that have been sent, they minimize the time that they ask for to solve big questions like, is there a black hole in this galaxy? this resulted in a number of many hours of telescope time use that were completely inefficient and were never used to publish anything except noise. So don't make that mistake. You need, if you need a signal to noise of 10, get a signal to noise of 10. Make sure that this is the number you need, but don't ask for 5. That just to say, well, it's not going to go through. If your ID is great, get crazy on your IDs, ask for 10, signal to noise of 10. That's super important. And the third thing I don't remember, so I'm going to come back afterwards. But it was
we can come back. Don't forget that asking time is good. Getting science results and publishing them is better. Okay, never. You need, if you get the data, you need to try to do something with it. Else, well, it depends a bit of the instrument. But if it's not an anonymous system, the committee will remember that you got data and you did nothing with it. Let's move in.
So
let's move on to the next.
Maybe just to add something I just remember is if you think your project is too ambitious, too many hours, too many nights, there is a strategy which can work sometimes, which is to put your foot in the door. So you ask for a subset or a small prototype proposal to demonstrate that it's actually going to do what you think it's going to do. That's the proposal panels usually like this. They don't like to invest hundreds and hundreds of hours or nights without being sure. So you could do this. Beware, if you ask for a third of your sample and you get the data, there is also the feedback effect, which is, oh, you got a third of your data. We're not going to give you the other 2/3 because, it's enough. So there is also, so you need to find the right balance in this argument. But sometimes you can put your foot in the door by asking, by putting a prototype proposal.
Yeah, indeed, you can always apply for pilot project. So you must tailor your project in such a way that you can take a subset that is giving you the most you can extract from the data. And it's also a good idea when you perform the observation to be able to adjust. So asking to be not in service mode, but if possible, it is not always possible, be there and adjust because it depends on the night conditions. So you do your ATC simulation, but maybe then the condition of the night are not as good. So always be careful. There are also statistics about the nights at the telescope. So you can look in the period in which your observations are scheduled, how is the rate of good nights that you can expect. And so be careful also in evaluating on the ATC the time that you need.
Eddie?
I have a small question about the risk of submitting a proposal for, like, let's say, an unobserved source. When you said that it's like, wouldn't it also go the other way? Like, observing an unobserved source, wouldn't that also bring a lot of information, even though, let's say, we don't get what we expected, but still like a negative result, like it's still a result if it's published?
I would answer common sense. I mean, it's a very difficult question because it applies to so many different cases. So I think you would need to apply common sense yourself, maybe also consult with your colleagues. I don't think there's a universal answer to that. That's my thinking, but so just apply your mind to it and ask maybe your colleagues to answer also what the opinion is.
Well, in that case, I would put all the effort in explaining why I should start observing this new source and why. I mean, it's the obvious thing. Why? What is new? What is bringing for new? That people have been trying to observe this parameter of space, but you realize that this source is tracing this parameter of space, and then you have to. I think if you have arguments, you will get the proposal also.
Yeah, the way you ask the question is you ask it in a positive way. So in the sense that you will get something different. The fact is that for a committee, you have to convince them that you will get something first. First step is if you observe something, you get an observation. And for new sources, it's not necessarily easy. So what Javier is saying, you should have the maximum of information outside of the range you are observing first to convince a panel, because the panel cannot give you time saying you will observe a new source, but they don't know if it will give something or not, even if, without asking first themselves, it will be different or the same, or it's really very important.
I can only insist on ALMA specifically. In ALMA, there is not such a panel, okay? You are writing to colleagues. Your colleagues are going to evaluate your proposal. So this also, at least for me, it changed the way I write, you know? JWST, you will have a committee, you know? But for ALMA, unless you write a large program, where then you go to a senior committee, you're writing for your colleagues, you know?
And do you prefer ALMA or GWST?
I'm old-fashioned. I mean, I don't like this way of evaluating in ALMA, but...
Fully agree with you. I wanted just to add that JWST also has DPR. So there are panels, but only for X percentage or above some hours. And that's great. But unfortunately, also DPR. So, yeah.
Move on.
Yeah, because we've got 4 broad categories of questions. But of course, I'm sure all the panelists will be happy to discuss further at the coffee break. So the next set of questions we have is most of you in the room are PhD students, and many of you will have had PhD topics that were essentially sort of devised by your supervisor or co-devised with your supervisor. But as you go further on in research, you have to become more autonomous. So, and so this set of questions is really about how you as panelists had made that transition between, you know, a student to somebody who was an independent researcher who sort of takes the lead in having their own ideas and coming up with their own ideas. So I wanted to call this section, How Do You Learn to Think for Yourself? But Jerome thought that was too negative. So we called it, When Should You Start Dreaming Big? So I'll just read all out the questions and I ask you to respond to any of them. They're sort of like, where do your ideas come from? Is it important, and how important is it for you sort of intellectually to work in diverse environments, diverse institutes with different people? What fraction of your time do you feel that you should spend thinking outside just the current sort of specific scientific question that you're an expert in, and so you're sort of doing your business in a certain question, in a certain sense? Do you need a team? Do you need a network? And how do you build that network? If you are in a large collaboration as a young researcher, how do you navigate that? How do you sort of become sort of recognised for the work you do, but also establish yourself as somebody who thinks independently from what you're just being asked to do by the senior people in the collaboration? What do you think are the most important skills for a good researcher? And what about for becoming a famous researcher? Are they, you know, there's a reason that there are 2 questions. And how do you deal with imposter syndrome? So
Yeah.
any of them.
I'll start with the beginning, and I think we should go to the last ones because they are the most interesting, probably.
Yeah.
But one thing, just to show a failure of a supervisor in this case, about where the ideas come from and what kind of time should you invest in thinking out of the box. Okay, I'm going to be very abrupt. There are only, in my perspective, opinion, only very, very few people who can just come out with ideas that are really bright and new and super creative like this. And it's becoming harder and harder because it's more complicated and we know more and more things. So I would assume for myself that I'm like anybody else, not brighter, maybe not worse than any others. And my experience is that every time I talk to people, I get ideas. And it's the process of repeating this interaction with a rich variety, as rich as possible, of opinions, of expertise, that sometimes you connect facts which are very distinct or have nothing to do with each other, sometimes even from your personal life, and you have an idea. And it's coming, and I'm not saying it's the only process. Again, there's no universal answer to this. But I would say getting in contact. We are not isolated. I mean, the brain of humans is not made to be alone in a room thinking by itself. That's not how we evolved. And we're not efficient in there, except maybe a super small minority of people who can do that. So I would say, please connect with people, don't take for granted what they say, but get enriched with all the variety of input you can get as much as possible. And the second advice, which is a failure of a supervisor, all the students I had as a PhD, the first thing on the first day that I said, among many other things, is you have a week of work standard, take 2 hours, at least 2 hours from that week and go for a walk. Just do something, whatever suits you, find your mode to think about nothing. Just get out in nature or elsewhere, whatever fits you, to think out of, don't stay in front of your computer. Try to extract yourself from there and do these 2 hours. The failure is that none of the PhD students I advised this to do did that. And so I don't know if it's a good recipe, but I'm still convinced it's an interesting exercise because it gets the way the brain works is very focused in certain areas. And that basically takes you out of your context and let your mind wander. And my experience is the best ideas, best meaning not necessarily for science, but in other respects. I think none of the papers I wrote are successful in any way. But the one that I loved, and it's really emotional, best, came from this wandering of my mind, not controlling it, trying to, I'm going to think out of the box now. That didn't work for me, and maybe it works for you, I don't know. So get connected, get enriched by all the variety of inputs. They are all wrong, but they will enrich you. And they're all different, but they will enrich you. And if possible, take a couple of hours per week, get out of your context, and try to let your mind wander.
So in this sense, also talking about connections and working in collaboration, sometimes it happens that young people ask to me, what should I do? I don't feel well in my role in the large collaboration. I don't have visibility. And I understand because you must find postdocs and you want a permanent position. So in this sense, I think that you have to develop some skill that is fundamental for the collaboration and take the most interacting with people and also understand if I develop, I don't know, now, for instance, AI is the next topic. This can be something that you can apply to many different collaborations. So don't be tightly relied to a project. I mentioned already the problem of people who worked for Gaia, that then couldn't find other postdoc position. So remember, people are offering you work. It is up to you to talk to other people and understand if the profile that is offered fits your need, what you want for your future. Because, I mean, all work offers seems say good at the same level, but are not. So don't be afraid to ask other people in the collaboration what they think, and look also outside your usual collaborative environment.
A few thoughts. I mean, I don't have a magic recipe. Okay, in my case, the good ideas come to me when I'm more relaxed. So this normally is outside the office, is what you were trying to say probably. So walking in the shower, so it's good not to be stressed the 7 days of the week. Okay, about the generating super new ideas, I will not be so stressed when you are at the PhD level. Okay, because there is always a learning curve. So what I encourage, at least my students, to read papers, and if you find a paper that you think is fundamental, okay, in your field, you read it and you say, well, I understand 50%. And then you come back like 6 months later, you read it again, now I understand 70%. And then you become a senior and you read it again and you always learn. So for me, reading things that are not coming from your team, but coming from your competitors, for example, it's a good way of learning, okay? Also, don't be afraid of asking questions, okay? If you don't have questions, maybe you have a problem in science, okay? And yeah, the imposter thing is something we probably all went through this, okay? But I think we have to accept our limitations, and there are very bright people, but I have seen many bright students and postdoc live in science, because for science you need a brain, but you need other aptitudes, okay? You need to collaborate, you need to talk. So it's funny, but sometimes the smartest people live science, okay? So this is also something to think. And I personally also like modesty, okay? So the way you ask, the way you treat your collaborators is with some kind of modesty. And yeah.
So I should pursue on that. Among the question, maybe on the question of which fraction of your time you should spend thinking outside of your current business, it's for me an important question. Again, we are discussing a lot of common sense, and we are each individuals, so we do not behave or react the same way. So there is not a good number of collaborators. It's not 10 or 20 or 2 or 3. It also depends on how you are, how you behave, how you interact. You still need to have exchange with others. That's true. In terms of fraction of your time you should spend thinking outside, science is creativity. It's really something. Curiosity and creativity are essential skills for me. But life is an unstable equilibrium. So if you are too focused on a too focused question, maybe you're in trouble. But here, if you are spending all your time looking at new things every day, then you might also have at some point a problem, because you also need to get a learning curve. So life is an equilibrium. For me, it's good to have both sides and to be on top of the curve of the unstable equilibrium. But it's really important to go and see other to go outside of your daily work. When you are in a laboratory, in general, you can start with the other teams you interact with, if you have this possibility, and then also look around. Interdisciplinarity is something extremely important, as was already said in different ways. The fact you see something applied to a different field or to something brings you new ideas. So it's really something important.
Just to add, I mean, you said everything there is to say, but a lot of the times it's really depending on your relationship with your supervisor, which you can control only up to a point, and this is truth. In an ideal world, I think your supervisor should encourage you to have your own ideas almost right from the start, not necessarily ideas that will develop, but just to give you the confidence to bring this idea to your supervisor at a constant basis. So in an ideal world, again, which often doesn't happen when you're in big collaborations where there are deadlines, but in an ideal world, after your first project, the second project or your second paper should really come from you. So I would say, if you feel that you have that freedom in your relationship with the supervisor or with the project, I would take that on board immediately.
Eric's going to respond to that, I think.
No, I want to talk about the ecosystem that we have. So when you're in a system that has some criteria, the tendency is that you find the best way to fulfill those criteria. I mean, the best example is impact factors and citations. It's not that a paper that has more citations is better. It's just that you found a way to fill the system. And it's actually known that the impact factor is meaningless, for example. So the system is always going to adapt to maximize whatever criterion you're going to put, whatever criterion, even if it's a good one. And I think for the ecosystem, we as senior astronomers, we are responsible for that. You have to realize you are the next generation. So what is the ecosystem you want to build? Let's put it in an extreme way. Do you want to build a system where you have to look over the shoulder of your colleague because you are afraid that that colleague will steal your result? I guess not, right? So let's be nice with each other. Let's be respectful. I would say, I would use the same words that we're giving for open science, if you know what it is. Be open as open as possible and as close as necessary. This is very important, I think, for me, sharing, discussing, sharing the excitement, the beauty of science. For me, it's essential. If you don't feel that, I would say reconsider, either by finding it or find a different job, maybe, and a different ecosystem. The most important for me is you don't realize it because it's too early, but we built up our ecosystem, and I am to blame for things that I don't like in the ecosystem today because I lived through it and I let it go. And just to give an example, which I mentioned at lunch, the Nobel Prize, I don't think this is potentially your goal and it's not mine, but the Nobel Prize criteria is about a number of things, but it's not about ethics. So those people are not role models for me. And the luxury we have, I would say the biggest luxury I have as a person who has a job is not to do science. It's to do science with the people I like. Not necessarily the most brilliant mind, but the people I can work with, I can trust, I can share everything. And in an ideal world, this would be the entire community. And this is my hope. So if you can just work in one step forward towards that and choose your own, doing, like competition is good, is healthy. That's how you get your best ideas, but it's not good if it censures your sharing. So that would be my biggest advice. What is the difference between a good scientist and a famous scientist? I would love that these two things are the same, but it's not. So if you can work one step towards making them closer, that would be fantastic.
Thanks, Eric. Were there questions from the floor? Otherwise, the very last question, which is this thing called imposter syndrome, which we've all, I'm sure, had. And it's natural if you have it. And so the question was partly if you have strategies that when you've experienced it in the past, how have you sort of overcome it? Or what have you told yourself to reassure yourself that it's...
So my only advice is talk about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't help me or other people to have it. And I have people in my team who got it very strongly. Like I have a person in my team that used negatives all the time. And we had a deal that I forbid her to do that. It's a game, it's nothing offensive. So, but what helps is that you talk about it. You just go and it's like a psychologist. You go to your trustful colleague and say, I have an imposter syndrome. Just talk about it, get it out of your chest. And you realize maybe that this person will give you the perspective of, why? I mean, wow. I mean, I'm so impressed with what you're doing and blah, blah, blah. And then, after talking about it, you get out of it. So I don't think I can prevent it to happen. I think we need a better ecosystem to do that society. So I don't have a good answer to that. But if you feel it once, just get it out of your system. Talk to a trustful person or even a few trustful person to get different perspective about it.
Yeah, I have a comment. When you hear about people, what they tell you is their best stories. They don't speak about their failures. And we all have, well, I can tell you that if you refuse to postdocs, well, that happens, okay? And it says nothing about the quality, your intrinsic quality, okay? You should make a difference between, another important stuff is to make a difference between your work and you. Those are two different stuff, okay?
Yeah, and to that I would just add, it's fine to not know the answer, and it's fun to learn. And so if you can put those two things together, which is I don't know, but I'm really excited to find out. I've often found that has helped the imposter syndrome. So I think we're going to switch, just in the interest of time, to the next topic.
there is one more thing I think that has not been mentioned, but to get ideas, go to seminars. Your institute, your laboratories are organizing seminars. Go to them. When you're PhD, you have the impression that you don't have times. But if you don't have times when you're PhD, it will be worse afterwards. So that's really the times where you should go to seminar. Okay. So artificial intelligence. Most of us, all of us, started science without artificial intelligence, and today it's there. So we have to discuss about it at least. Okay, we're scientists. We have to adapt. So for the first question, the initial question is: should we use AI to write proposal papers, public outreach? And then I say, it's obvious that at some point we will use those tools. Okay, in my view, exactly, we have to use those tools. Okay, the question is, how should we use them in order to do this, and what are the risks? Are we well trained to use AI? I would say no, but then the question is, how do we get trained to use AI? And then a side question that is, we should not be naive, okay? AI is consuming lots of energy. And so we immediately need to think about ourselves. What is the business model behind it? Okay, if ChatGPT is free for you, means something. Okay, it probably means that you're the product and not the user. Okay, and if it's not free, should we ask our institutes to get paying license? The floor is yours.
I make use of AI, but it's very sporadic. So yeah, just it's very simple. So I start because I use, for instance, when I write some text, I pass to the AI just to have a better text, and that's all. I don't think that I will ever use for evaluate proposal, because for evaluating person, I don't want AI to do that for me. So I take an effort and I evaluate the person by my brain and not by a machine. I think there are statistical tools that we can use that are very, very useful. And in this sense, I simply collaborate with young people that are much better than me using those tools. So I can share with them knowledge of basic science, let's say, and my experience and which topic could be cool to analyze. And they have a better tool than I am. So I have collaboration with those people. And for me, it's works perfectly fine on both sides.
Just like to actually for once reverse a little bit the question towards you, because I doubt that in a sense you're going to use our advice on AI as much as you may use our advice on other things. And maybe you shouldn't, because I think it's your generation and the one after actually that will decide how AI is going to be used for everything, including academia. So in a sense, I think our job at the moment is to assess the risks rather than advise you on the use. So I would like to actually talk more about the risks, if any, that one may have when using AI. It depends what you use AI for, as always, I would say. And the only risk I can think of, and probably not much for your generation, but for the ones that come afterwards, is there any risk that one loses analytical skills by using constantly AI, because it's so easy to get an answer that you don't spend the time thinking about the answer first. So that to me is the biggest risk for AI.
So let's make a bit of a survey. Who is using AI once a day today? So, AI, whatever, okay? Once a day, okay? Once a week? Never? Okay, so you get trained to do this. I still think that we need to get trained. If you didn't, I encourage you to read in Dahlia Barnes, in one of her tutorial, she gives some indication on how to use AI for science. And I think that what she is giving as advice is very straight to the point, in particular not to ask vague questions, ask questions that are with context, okay? For instance, if you're asking a science questions, tell at which level you are, okay? You can say, I'm PhD, I'm a professor, I'm a postdoc, I'm a specialist. I'm a professor, but I'm not a specialist of this domain. So I'm professor in science. I'm not specialist of the domain. Please explain me. This will allow the tool to try to give you answers that are more generic or less generic, more focused to your needs. What's your experience?
So far, my search with AI has been like, first I try to classify what is it I'm searching. Do I know enough about the subject or not? If I don't, then my go-to would be like a textbook or a lecture notes of some professor that are publicly available. So I do a Google search instead. If I know enough about it, then I provide the question and the answer and tell what I don't know and ask it to fill in those blanks. So that works out for me, but most of the time it is usually writing codes to make plots where if I like a plot that I see in some paper and I want to make similar plots, then I take a screenshot. I just ask AI to write a code for, making similar plots. Yeah.
I can say that unfortunately nowadays, if you don't use AI, you kind of fall behind of all the other people that are using AI. There are of course risks that you have to, evaluate. I don't think before you use AI, but generally we all know that AI has risks depending on how do you use it. So if you use AI to write code, for example, you know that there might be bugs in the code or something like that. But I think also at the same time that there are tools outside that can do things that all of us, unfortunately, just don't do it because we are either bored or we don't have time to do. One of it that comes on top of my head is documenting code, which is you have so many codes out there or, software or things like that, that they are huge. There are so many lines of code and no one really goes into those things and puts the time to write a nice documentation code. There are multiple problems about this, and AI can do it in 10 minutes. And then you can evaluate that documentation afterwards and say, okay, is it a good documentation? If you use the code, for example, and you know how it works, all the details, so you can go afterwards and see if the AI did a good job. Sometimes this is also risky because you might spend more time correcting the AI than if you did your work yourself. So this is one of the risks. But unfortunately, I think in many levels nowadays, if you don't use it, not in every day or generally, if you don't use it, you are in the unfortunate position to fall behind because everyone is using it, specifically to write code. This is, I think, the most important use of AI nowadays. I don't think that people using it to write proposals or to write
You would be surprised.
publications or something like that. I think we are as of now too smart to not do this, because it's not that good. But for writing code, for example, it's very good, and you can use it to write lines and lines of code in hours, while you might have spent days or months to write the same lines of code before you had some tools that they are available right now.
So do you pay? Who is paying for having access to AI? Raise your hands more. A small fraction. And why do you pay?
Yeah, I would like to say something, because I don't know how many of you, including myself, think about this, but there is in the discussion. I mean, those discussions are very important, and I think you have to define how to use it in the future. One thing is certain is I don't know the future. I cannot. If I would predict today, then you should not trust me, because that's one thing that humans are very bad at. But one thing that I convinced myself with, and especially listening to the experts who are developing the next generation, is that what we're talking about today has no relevance to what you're going to use in 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And so in a sense, this discussion is a bit of a precursor of something completely different. I mean, we're talking about training and so on. If I understand correctly, what is on the verge to happen is going to be adaptive AI, which is very different conceptually. So I don't know what the future will be, but I think you will have to be deciding how you want to do academics and research with that. And maybe one thing I could say is maybe you should discuss among yourself what is the scientific approach, because if you remember that, whatever the tools that are coming online, you will be able at least to keep that. How you actually conduct research, what is progress, what is not. And the tools I think that we have now have nothing to do with what's going to be in 5 to 10 years from now. I think we have no idea. And I really mean it. I really mean it. I mean, this is a big jump.
Do you think you're well trained to use AI? Who is thinking that is well trained? So first, who gets some lecture or how AI is working? And okay, not so many. So all the other ones just try to do it by themselves, I guess. And would you like to have guidelines or not at all? Who would like to have some guidelines about using AI? I think we have to.
Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think at some point we should distinguish two things. If you think that you're well trained to use AI, it's nowadays it's two different things. One thing is how you develop your own AI algorithm to fit your data and to unify sources. And there's another way, which is LLM, and it's another thing. So sometimes it's better to specify what are you meaning by how to use AI.
I agree.
So I just wanted to add something to what Theo said before, that sadly about papers being written by AI is something that it's actually coming out. Some of my colleagues shared some Nature articles like that actually discovered a lot of paper on the thousands that were basically like already existing paper rephrased with some weird words that usually no one would use, but they were used by AI to not fall into plagiarism. So it's actually a practice that's coming out, and I think will be more and more common to see. And yeah, that's it. And about the answering the question, why do you pay for AI? It's because I am a software developer, so I code every single day, all the day, and I pay basically for to have access to it without limitations, because it really helps you do the okay. Like if you have to write something that will take you 10 minutes, which is just boring to do, AI will do it in 10 seconds, and you gain a lot of time. So, but I believe that to use it in that way, you actually need to, I don't really know how to say it, but I wouldn't say train to use it, but use it wisely. Because like, I have an example from a colleague of mine, which he doesn't code, but he's actually putting up an experiment where he needs to code, and all the coding has been done by ChatGPT, and the experiment is becoming a mess because he doesn't know what he's doing, basically. So I guess the best way to use AI actually is for learning how to do things. Like, never ask for the solution, but ask how to get to the solution. That's what I believe and how I actually use it.
One from Teo.
I would say the moment you realize that AI is a very smart assistant and not your tool that knows everything, you really elevate your game with AI. So if you have something that you know and you reach in a level, for example, that you don't understand something and you need someone to help you, it's like me going to someone and saying, okay, I did this, it didn't work. What should I do next? This is exactly what you're going to describe to a colleague of you that has the knowledge that you don't have, to an AI, to an LLM. And if that LLM gives you an adequate enough answer to your question, then you're happy. Maybe you try it and you see it works, and then you progress and you move on with your work. I think this is the #1 priority you should have. You should never go blindly to an LLM and say, okay, I want a code that simulates the universe. You will never be able to understand anything in that code, and both the input and the output. So that's pointless. But if you have an already big thing that does something and there is just something tiny that you don't understand, then you can just simply use it as a very good assistant.
Other questions, comments on the panel? No? So let's move to the next topic.
As I'm coming down the stairs, I'm just going to respond quickly to Serena's comment about what risk does it have on our analytical thinking. This is a very big subject in neuroscience right now. And we recently, in our collaboration, had a colleague post a paper from neuroscience, which was looking at people using language models to generate text versus trying to come up, write the text from scratch themselves, and then sort of mixed group. And it's very interesting reading. So I'll forward the link. It does change the electronic patterns in your brain. Okay, so the final sort of section of this roundtable is really about what we mean by responsible research. And it's deliberately open and not defined because it's partly to ask, what do you think that means? Personally, where do you think it's more important? In what domain do you see a real role for researchers to be responsible in whatever fashion you want to define it. And then a few more pointed questions at the end. I think my group, but some of you will have heard me say, oh, you young people, you're so lucky you don't realise how much data you have. And yet when I read papers and I work on molecular gas in nearby galaxies, 1989 was an excellent vintage. And those scientists then did not have that much data, but the ideas they had like still impact the way we think about the molecular gas in galaxies today. And so that's the second question, which is, we have all this data, but is the rate of our understanding keeping up with the rate of the data acquisition? Because ultimately it's not just having bits, it's also understanding the physics. And then I guess we're coming full circle back to Eric's discussion about the sort of ecosystem in which we do science. Are we becoming sort of quite productivist in the way we measure the work that we do? And, you know, what impact is that having in terms of who stays in science, who leaves science, our own mental health and our own balance, and how can we rethink that? So I'll open up to the panelists. Easy questions. Or to the audience, if somebody wants to add a question or rephrase one of those questions. Yep.
I'm just going to say something brief to echo maybe what you meant, but maybe not. We are data rich, and the rate of progress is not limited by data anymore. And I think I can almost say that's a fact because there are references showing this. And so what is left is you. That's the value. It's not the data. We have too many and too much. We shouldn't say this very loud for a number of reasons. Just, I think this is important to realize. The limitation of progress is us. And so this is where we should put our thinking.
I mean, I agree with that. There is definitely so much more data and definitely enough data, but I think it also will depend on the field. As always, there are some fields that are more emergent than others, for which data still have to come, or enough data still have to come. One that comes to mind, which is not my field, nor the field of this conference. But if you're interested in the atmosphere of extrasolar planets, by definition, we don't have enough data, certainly not spectroscopically. So in that case, we don't, but I agree with you that, well, for nearby galaxies, for example, we certainly are not limited with data. So I think it's very field dependent.
So I would slightly disagree with you. Why are you writing new proposals then?
Yeah, I mean, it is, well, to be honest, I actually encourage myself and others to use the archive a lot. And a lot of the papers that we write are with archival data. There are still obviously holes when you do use the archival data. You find holes that you want to fill that maybe doesn't sound that exciting, and so we may not get the time, of course, but the holes are there, so you can fill the data. So I feel at least justified when I write the proposals that I have at least looked in the archive. And also it's genuinely that you can have ideas where you need different data or more data. So I'm not saying that people should not apply anymore for data. I'm saying that there is genuinely a lot of data out there, and some have not been used or published. So I'm thinking, for example, and maybe Annie, maybe you disagree with that, I'll be interested to know. Herschel, there are some areas, some fields in Herschel, with Herschel data that have hardly made an impact in the sense that they have not been published. There is so much data out there in the archives, and maybe many ideas could come from those. In fact, observatories, ESO for sure, encourages the use of archival data. A lot of money actually have been spent to make this archive usable, user-friendly. So it's our responsibility to use them,
I agree that using the archive is good. I slightly disagree with the idea that we have enough data to solve the question of nearby galaxy or ESM or this.
Yes. No, I didn't say that. That's it.
Okay.
We have, hang on. Well.
Just a quick comment on that. So I'm also a big proponent of using archive data, but it's a different frame of mind. When you write your own proposal, you really try to design observation to address your goal. While when you do archival work, you look at the data that you have and see what question can I answer with those data. So that's a different way of thinking.
That's another thing that you should, when writing proposal, you should first look in the archive, because if it has already been done, you will not be granted the time.
You just teased that there are papers that show that we are not in a data limited regime, and that made me wonder, how do you quantify that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think, just to clarify what I said, I didn't say that we shouldn't get more data. I just said that the rate of progress is more limited by the community than by the data. That's all I said. And that's clear. You take the amount of data that we have, or you take the quality of data, which is a different thing that you need to define. And then you look at the community and how it relates with the data. And it's a bit like marginalizing, when you do studies, statistical studies, you marginalized against what is the prime actor. And you can see that basically the community is what limits the progress, in the sense, it could be that if you add a few more people that are super productive or super efficient, you solve the problem. But taking the statistics of the population as it is, which is not the same population as 20 years ago, not just in numbers, it seems that the community is what limits everything, not the data today. It's not the same as saying that we don't need more data. I mean, there's a very big difference there. So I hope I didn't, does it answer your question? Yeah, it's very different. We need more data to understand a number of problems. I'm not saying that we're just looking at the archive when we solve everything. That's not what I'm saying. But if we want to progress with, a good pace, the limiting factor is not the data.
Just to what you've been saying, I'm not sure if saying the community is slowing the progress. I'm not quite sure if I understand correctly what you're saying. If you could.
It's not slowing down the progress. It's a political decision at the end to say, what do you want for your research? If you say, my criterion is maximizing the productivity, then the solution is not to get more data, it's to get more people. That's what it says. That's all what it says. It doesn't say the community is slowing down anything. The community is working as best as they can. That's clear. Is that clear now?
That was, I was wondering, like, if
No,
people are working.
So if the problem is my metric is I want to maximize the productivity of science today, and I have to choose between data and people, I think the fact says that we need people, not data. That's all it says. It doesn't say anything about how to solve, whether we want to know if life is here or there, or what is dark matter or whatever. That's a different problem.
I'm sorry, I really don't want to pressure you or fact check or anything, but is this your personal opinion, or is there some paper, some, I don't know, public analysis?
Very good question. Always verify the source. I'll try to assemble something and put it on Slack.
Lindsay. Yep.
Within the limiting factor of the community, what do you think the limiting factor within that is? Is it methods aren't quite keeping pace with the amount of data we have, or is it the organization of collaborations and the types of skills people have? What do you think is?
I don't think so about negatives here, because I don't know, actually. I haven't studied that. It's just we are not enough to deal with the data we have. That's all. But yeah, maybe we could make it more efficient. If you have an idea about this, but I have no clue. Yeah, I don't know.
I can go back to the first question. What do you think responsible research is? because we didn't touch this thing. So of course, now we know we live in a planet with limited resources. So when I was working for the Herschel Space Observatory, like 15 years ago, I was like flying every two months, no? And now I think we are, especially the new generation, are changing the pattern, no? So I was wondering, what do you think? I mean, how many conferences should we go per year, for example, you know? Is it really flying polluting as much as computing, for example? Do we know the numbers?
Now you're flying how many time a year?
I cannot tell.
Well,
But I encourage my students not to fly.
So,
but
maybe-
you're facing
Oh.
the problem of the business model in that case, because it's also known that the more the people fly, the more recognition they get. So it's the same as the impact factors or these kind of things. I mean, it's all what we are discussing is common sense, but it's political issues first. I mean, if we decide that we are not rating the people with the number of conferences they're going to and with the number of interventions they make, then it will auto-stabilize. But if not, I mean, the more you fly, the more you meet people, the more you spread the news, the more you're known. I mean, it's obvious. How do you? I'm provocative on purpose. I mean, what is the solution to that?
What's the
Do you
solution?
propose?
What do you propose? I mean, how many transatlantic conferences should we go per year?
Well, even more generally, I'd be interested to know how many of you sort of have asked yourself the question, you know, like, how is the research area that I've chosen for myself compatible or not with either your carbon footprint or with how you feel responsible about, I don't know, public education or other areas in which you might imagine that I, as a scientific researcher, have some responsibility. Is that something you think about, or not at all?
So as the background, I come from a very rural area in America. Nobody around me is a scientist for a very long way. And when I started going into science, people would always ask me, like, okay, well, like, what are you doing to benefit me? Like, what are you doing to benefit us? And for a very long time, my answer was, well, I'm not. I'm not gonna change your life or anything by studying the universe. And very recently, within the past 6 months, I just don't think that's true. I think it's easy for us to kind of get lost in what our research is. So oh, I study star formation, so that's really the only thing that matters. But I think we need to consider the broader perspectives that come with it. Are you funded by the government? Where does your funding come from? What are the economic impacts of your funding? For example, in the United States, NASA has a return of 3 to 1 on their scientific investments. And especially with the way that, funding is looking these days, I think it's something to consider, especially when we do science. It's not just for us, but it's for the next generation. It's for the people that come after us. We're helping to basically inspire and train a new workforce. So just kind of thinking about the broader impacts instead of getting too stuck in our own heads. To us, it might be common sense that what we do is important, but that's not always the case.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you. That was...
Yeah, I have to say I'm usually quite frustrated with the community in that regard, in the sense that we usually talk about it, and there's always now the sustainability splinter and the conference and so on, but still everybody is flying there, and we are saying, yeah, no, we're like these liberal people, we believe in science and climate change. But I mean, I have friends who maybe are more on the conservative side than I am, and they maybe fly once per year, and we are usually jetting around the world and so on. And it also puts a lot of pressure to some degree on us. Now, we are young scientists. I truly believe that personal contact is really, really important. I know that I want to directly talk to people, get to know them, have a wine with them, maybe go for a swim and see what they are doing. Yet I feel that this is also like in generally supported in the sense that we talked about like metrics, how we are measuring like success, and yeah, at the end, people will look at your CV and say, ah, he went to this major conference in the States, and he went there and he did this, and he has like a proper network and so on. So this is like encouraged. We are encouraged to travel a lot, and I can make the personal decision to say, well, I will not travel. I will not do like the transatlantic flight. I will try to take the train. This will mean it takes a day longer and something. It will cost more. So I have limited funding. Okay, that means I will have less to travel to another place and so on. So like all the ecosystem is not supporting the decision for me to be sustainable. And I think as a PhD student, like honestly, like I'm personally frustrated because of that, because I want to be sustainable, but I also don't want to make the decision to put me in a worse place than somebody who's not doing that. So yes, currently I'm flying as much as I ever did in my life before since I started my PhD. It's ridiculous. I don't know how that happened, and I mean it's a bit weird. So I don't think that we are really honest to ourselves that there's a willingness to change, because I can't see it anywhere.
Sorry, I just I want just to mention a little bit that we are not so responsible as big corporations or something like this for carbon footprint. And I don't know, when all this environment trying to push us to feel this response for our travels and all of that, it seems a little bit not very, I don't know how to express this, but it's a little bit strange to give us this response, but it's a drop in this ocean that big corporations involve in carbon footprint, and even if everybody in this conference would take a flight for this school, it would be, I don't know, maybe day or some factory who made the clothes every day and all of that. So we not so responsible as government should be for their carbon footprint. So limit our connections, it sounds a little bit strange for me. I don't know.
So I want to say something, because we discussed this among, let's say, different faculties. I think you're right. I think there's a bit of hypocritical thinking there. At the same time, I think there's people are sensible to those arguments. And for example, there were discussions about, oh, should we just limit our way of traveling and transfer this, or at least a part of this, to the younger people? But for that, I think we are doing this, actually. There are a number of people who stopped, at least my colleagues, stopped traveling in the sense that they decreased the rate of traveling by a factor of 10. I did that myself. Not necessarily entirely for carbon footprint, I have to admit, but still. So why don't we put a value somewhere? So I would say it's a two sides coin. We need to put a value in those things. We need to credit them. That's the only way it's going to work. And we need to make a metric out of this. Remember, if you define a metric, the system will find a way to fulfill that metric. But at least for a time being, the responsibility, the other side of the coin, is on your side, which is that I know many students, postdocs, and even faculty will go to conferences, talk to 3 people, friends, and that's it. If I go to a conference, I look at the list of participants way before. I say, okay, these are the 15 people I want to talk to. These are the people I want to meet. These are the sessions I'm going to attend. I'm going to try and maximize the outcome. We are humans, so yeah, we say something and we do half of it, but at least, we get into the culture. So I think it's a two sides coin. Please ask us, people who are establishing the policies, to commit with quantitative measures that make sense to you, including encouraging the fact that, yes, you need connections. Yes, you need to be the ones to profit this, not the other way around. On your side, you have the responsibility to use that. And it needs to go in parallel. We can't ask you anything before we do something. We're all in the same boat. So put pressure on us. That's the best service you can do us, I think. But just to reassure you, we are discussing about this and try to.
So is ESO and the observatories implementing policies in this respect?
Yes and no. So we are trying hard. We actually have an environment group that is provoking hyper management about this. It's a very big boat, very conservative boat. The people in there are not conservative, but the boat is. So it moves slowly, but faster than I thought. So I hope on a timescale of 1 or 2 years, we'll have something that may be the first step. But there are already implemented rules that are not written by the head of the Office of Science, for example, looking at those things. But it's not yet kind of more formatted in the way we want.
I think I just want to make a comment as well. I think that, like, for us, it's kind of hard, to think about these things in terms of, like, we're trying to advance our career, we're trying to do these things where there are very specific metrics that you need to meet in terms of, like, networking and doing all these things. So I feel like lowering the carbon footprint individually is hard, but I think as a community, there is things that we can do, and people in power can, push for more environmentally friendly policies and things like us using GPUs and all of these data centers. I feel like trying to push governments in order to make those more sustainable. So when we use them, they use less resources and carbon footprint and stuff like that. I feel like we could make a bigger impact as a community as a whole, pushing for these things, maybe like white papers or stuff like that. But
I'm listening, and it's a bit curious that this is you who will make the future, and this side of the room is saying, you're deciders, you should help us.
While Jerome walking up the steps, I'm just going to put out there that when you think about environmental responsibility and our carbon impact astronomers, don't limit yourself to your own personal travel, because it's very easy to get into arguments amongst ourselves. Is it 3 flights? Is it 2 flights? Is it 1 flight for a researcher and half a flight for a senior person? But think about the carbon footprint of putting a telescope in space and how many of them we need. So and that can only be answered at the community level. It's not on any individual PhD student to take a decision there. We all have to decide together. Sorry, Teo,
I'm gonna comment for some comments that they were made. I think that from our point of view, we saying that is, it sounds bad, but it's your responsibility, and by yours we mean like all of you PIs that they are sometimes higher than us, because you have not a better, maybe I would say maybe a stronger voice than many of us, because since there were many comments, for example, that we are trying to build our career, so we might sometimes have to go to a conference to speak with someone or present our work or the poster, for example. But when you see, for example, that conferences are in the middle of nowhere just because someone that is the organizer wants to be in Patagonia in August or something like that, then you see that the purpose of that conference is not about the science, it's about vacation. So this was actually discussed quite a lot in our university, whether or not we actually need that many conferences happening during the year, or if we need, for example, smaller conferences that they are addressing to smaller groups that they can go and be, 20 to 100 people that in the end, you can meet all of them. But when you go to a conference with thousands and thousands of participants, first of all, it's impossible to meet everyone. Second of all, the research that you're going to present probably very few people care about, and only a certain amount of people might actually hear the talk. But on the other perspective, to comment also the comment that Arina made, if we as a community try to minimize our carbon footprint, I think we're gonna just put a hole in the water, because someone will say that, okay, they minimize the carbon footprint, so we have more carbon footprint to produce. And those people are, you know, big corporations that they generally tend to produce quite a lot of carbon footprint. So we might be the problem, we might be the solution, but I don't know, it's a tough subject.
Let's.
There's Lily has a question or comment.
Yeah, it's more of a comment on what you said. I find it quite interesting that we mentioned carbon footprint and all we've kind of been talking about is travel, whereas there are so many other factors. Like, as you said, sending a telescope to space. We are saying, oh, AI will just become much larger. We are pushing people to use AI, which has an incredible carbon footprint that the companies aren't even publishing. Then we are building data centers. We said we need more data. We need more supercomputers to run our simulations and stuff like that. So like Arina said, if 50 people say, oh, we will not fly to this conference, but we will join on Zoom, there are so many other things we are doing that are, as you can say, horrible for the planet. So I think it just needs a very, very large rethinking. And I don't think for that, all countries need to agree on that. It's going to be very, very hard. So yeah.
So I believe that the point that was made about like the carbon footprint of putting a telescope into space or building the new super fancy instrument on the ground, it's a fair point. But since it's research what we do need technological advancement. So what it comes down to is technological advancement and making those new telescopes, those new instruments, more efficiently for an environmental point of view. So it's not really, for example, limiting the number of telescopes that we build or the instruments that we build. So yeah, that's a comment.
I have a couple of questions for the audience. Is this tool useful? And if we had to redo it, should we redo it face-to-face or with Zoom? So first question, was the school useful? Who think yes? Fair amount of people. Should we redo it? If we redo it, should we redo it face-to-face or on Zoom? So face-to-face.
What are you looking at me?
But Jerome,
I'm not. Just say
Jerome, a school is an obvious thing you need to do face-to-face, you know?
Well, I just, not obvious.
Well, for me, one of the, but things.
The first one we did, that was
COVID time.
COVID. We did it virtual, completely virtual.
No, things are changing. You know, when I was working in all these large programs, because there was no Zoom, so we had to travel. I told you, like every 2 months flying. Now, in the last 2 years, I've been working JWST ERS program, PDRs for all. We had many nice papers, you know, Nature, Science, blah, blah. And we never met. It was everything on Zoom. For me, it's a bit sad, you know, at least once or two, man. But it's true, during 3 years, we never met, only Zoom, you know? So things are changing also in the way we work.
So I was lucky to be part of the first edition of this school that was online. And I'm here. So I have the 2 point of views. And I think that the online edition was very open to everyone. despite of the funding. Well, this one, it is not.
That is very true, and I agree with that. And I personally believe that the perfect format would be an hybrid format, because like the beautiful thing of human contact, of knowing people, of go get dinner together, it's something that is, I mean, it's beautiful. It's experience, it's connections, whatever. But of course, the point that was made about the funding, about people who, for whatever reason, can't be here in person, lose the opportunity to learn and to, even if only virtually, meet people. I think it's a bit of a
Jerome, I've just had the 5-minute, which must be now 4 minutes fine from our president.
No, I wanted to say you have materials from the previous editions.
So, but this has a carbon footprint also.
Nothing compared to coming here.
No, sir.
You shouldn't, don't, yeah, but orders of magnitude difference, Jerome.
So just a correction to what Miriam said. So it's true that the first school, since there was no fee and no travel, so we were able to accept everyone. So we had 500 participants, including a lot from, poor countries. So this time it's true that it's not the case, but we still managed to get some grants and to support a few students. So it's just as we could do it, but it's a much smaller fraction. So, and we will try to do it in the future if we do that again, but we will be limited by the amount of money available.
Maybe to divert the conversation, I think you discussed a lot about the carbon footprint. I mean, there's a lot more to be said, I'm sure, from everybody. And this is being responsible. I think this is super important, and this is the obvious focus these days. I just want to say, maybe it's good if you take the time, if you still have a month together to talk about what is responsibility beyond that. I mean, for a researcher, because there are so many other very important day-to-day things that is associated with being a responsible researcher. What does it mean for you? What does it mean for your colleagues, your friends? Well, 4 minutes, forget it. But please do this among yourself. Try to see, bump your ideas against the others. What does it mean to be responsible? Because at least for me, it has been the center of my focus for so many years. And I have a biased opinion, personal one, and I have no clue if it's of any value. So you should define yours and bang it into the perspective of others.
A final comment? Let's get coffee.
Thank you, everybody, for a lively discussion. Thank you to our panelists.